You've heard of TGLC, SSX, BSB, and Senior Elite, but what about Unity All-Stars Black from the UK, or the Vancouver All-Stars Blackout from Canada? You see, I just listed off 6 world champion teams at the 2025 Cheerleading Worlds, but chances are, if you're American, you only recognize the first 4. What if I told you that some of the best cheerleaders in the world aren't even allowed to compete in the most elite divisions at the Cheerleading Worlds? In this video, we're breaking down the invisible wall that separates international teams from US teams, why it exists, who it benefits, and what that says about how we treat international talent in this sport. I want to start this off by saying that this isn't about bashing teams from the US, but rather about shedding a light on systemic issues that make the playing field uneven. First, let's talk about divisions. At the Cheerleading Worlds, there are 2 sets of divisions, USASF divisions and IASF divisions. What's the difference? In short, USASF divisions are for US teams only, while IASF divisions are open to teams from any country, including from the US in many cases. USASF, or the US All-Star Federation, divisions include divisions you've probably heard of, like Senior Small All-Girl Level 6, Senior Large Co-Ed Level 6, etc. These are the prestige divisions where legendary American teams compete. Think Stingray Orange or Top Gun TGLC. However, international teams are locked out of these divisions by rule. They're literally labeled open to US teams only in the official guideline. A British or Canadian team, for example, cannot register to go against, say, Cheer Extreme Senior Elite in the Large All-Girl Level 6 division. It's not about skill, it's about geography. IASF divisions were created to give non-US teams a place to compete at Worlds. These are often open-level divisions, think Open Level 6, Open Level 7, etc., and theoretically, any country's team can enter. Think Cheer Extreme Code Black, International Open Non-Tumbling Co-Ed Level 6, or Top Gun All-Stars 00, International Open Large Co-Ed 6. So US teams can cross into their divisions, but international teams cannot cross into the elite US-only divisions. Sounds unfair? A lot of people think so, and we're just getting started. To illustrate, imagine if the Olympics said, only Americans can swim the 50-meter freestyle, everyone else please swim in a different race. Pretty ridiculous, but that's basically what cheerleading is at this point. Cheerleading is separated by geography, as opposed to pure skill, unlike virtually every other competitive sport. To put it simply, the Cheerleading Worlds isn't run by a neutral international body with rotating locations. Why do you think USASF's Worlds has only ever been in America? So in other words, the United States runs the game. The Cheerleading World literally does not allow international teams to go head-to-head with Americans in elite divisions like Large All-Girl, Small Co-Ed, etc., even if they're good enough to win. Can we really call it a world championship if some of the world isn't allowed to compete for the top title? I feel it's important to note that in the international divisions at Worlds, finals are capped at a certain number of teams per country. Historically, only the top 3 teams from each country can advance to finals, to prevent, for example, the USA from flooding the finals round. So let's take the International U18 Non-Tumbling Co-Ed Level 6 division at the 2025 Cheerleading Worlds for example. The semi-final results were as follows. 1. USA Top Gun Angels. 2. USA Cheer Extreme Co-Ex. 3. USA ATA Quantum. 4. USA CJA SWAT. 5. USA All-Star 1 Victory. 6. USA Brandon Smoke. Skipping ahead, 8th Flyers All-Stars Royal from Canada. 10th Flyers All-Stars Onyx from Canada. And 20th Cheersport Sharks Bomber Sharks from Canada. Angels, Coex, Quantum, Royal, Onyx, and Bomber Sharks all made finals, leaving the other teams behind. That rule was originally made to ensure diversity in international finals, but it also underscores the oddity of having country quotas for a world event. The fact that we need a rule to limit American participation in the international track shows how blurred the lines have become. Here's something that's both very interesting and also very telling. While international teams can't go into American divisions, American teams have increasingly entered the international divisions. At the recent Worlds, some IASF division lineups are dominated by US programs, especially in Level 6 and 7 categories. At the 2025 Cheerleading Worlds, excluding Level 5 divisions, there were 12 international divisions for Level 6 and 7. 8 out of 12 American teams won. That's over half. Think about it from a non-US team's perspective. You're going to Worlds. Maybe you're expecting to go against teams from countries like Canada, England, France, and Italy. Teams around the world. But alas, you compete against multiple US teams, whose teams have access to the best coaches, huge talent pools, spring floors in every gym, advantages we'll discuss more soon. Suddenly, your international playing field includes the very giants you thought you were avoiding. It's like USA versus USA, then versus everybody else. Now, let's focus on the structural challenges international teams face. It's not just about the day of Worlds, but rather the journey getting there. In the United States, the All-Star Cheer season typically runs from late fall through April, with big national competitions like NCAA in February through March, and then Worlds in late April. American teams typically have these routines choreographed in late summer and early fall, and then compete them multiple times throughout the season. They're able to refine these routines multiple times in preparation for each competition. Now, let's take a look at this through the perspective of European teams. Many European teams don't get their choreography until later in the fall or winter. Their competition season might be shorter or start later, and they might only attend a couple of major competitions before Worlds. For example, a lot of UK gyms focus on their UK nationals in March, and then have a quick turnaround to Worlds in April. This means fewer opportunities for judges' critiques, less time to fix mistakes, and often they're peaking just as Worlds arrives. It's also important to recognize how fewer resources some international teams have in comparison to American teams. In the US, even your average mid-sized gym has access to one or multiple full-size spring floors, training camps, choreographers, and more. In contrast, some gyms overseas are much smaller, maybe sharing space with other sports, using old equipment, or even practicing on dead mats, because spring floors are extremely expensive to import. Not too long ago, it was common for European teams to practice tumbling on dead mat. This might seem outrageous to the average American all-star cheerleader, as spring floors have been the standard for decades in the US. Look at it this way. Every serious gymnastics program in the world now has proper equipment, and cheer should be the same. The point is, international teams often train with less, yet are expected to perform at the same level once they hit the Worlds mat in Orlando. That's an unfair disadvantage baked into the system. Cheerleading is expensive, but imagine how much more expensive it is for international teams who have to book long overseas flights to even compete at the cheerleading Worlds. It's not a flight across a few states for European teams, it's a flight across the Atlantic. Here's another thing. USASF/IASF now requires all international division teams to have at least 16 athletes on the floor. This rule was upped from a previous minimum of 10. While the intention might have been to ensure a good enough team size, this hurts small gyms. Let's say you have 12 solid athletes who have been putting in the work all season, because that's all your Worlds team can field. Well, too bad, you literally cannot compete. Meanwhile, teams from the US in the extra small senior division, for example, can compete with a minimum of 5 athletes. While it's extremely unrealistic, it's possible to become a world champion with 4 teammates. If that's not a double standard, what is? It highlights how rules don't account for the realities of tiny all-star programs in, say, Chile or Puerto Rico, who might only have a handful of level 6 athletes in their whole country. I know I've said a lot thus far, but there's even more to share if you're here to listen. Let's talk about cheer at the governance level. USASF is the main organization for American all-star cheer gyms. It was founded with heavy support from Varsity Spirit. IASF was originally part of USASF, but spun off in around 2016 to focus on international clubs. The ICU is an independent world governing body, recognized by the International Olympic Committee as the Federation for Cheerleading. So effectively, we have 2 worlds, ICUs for national squads and USASF/IASF for club squads. And here's where inequality creeps in. The USASF/IASF All-Star Worlds, despite its international participants, is run by an American organization with American interests. It stays in the US every year, specifically in Orlando, Florida. This means American teams never have to travel far for Worlds. It's always on home turf. International teams, conversely, always have to travel to the US, along with the costs and jet lag associated with their trip to Worlds. Because Varsity and USASF set it up, the event schedule and division offerings often prioritize what works for the American cheer industry. Like how we see an overwhelming amount of international teams competing at finals on the Monday of Worlds, when a lot of the spectators have already gone home for work or school. We're basically telling these teams that they're an afterthought. Can you imagine working hard year-round just to see more than half of the seats empty at your final performance of the season? It's just not right. Another thing to consider is bids. USASF hands out dozens upon dozens of Worlds bids within the US each season through Varsity's network of competitions. IASF, on the other hand, typically allots only few bids per country or region. For example, maybe there's 3 bids for all of Germany, or only a handful of bids across Latin America. And some US teams even get at-large bids, which are unpaid bids and can still go. In contrast, many countries only send teams that have won a paid bid due to cost, so the funnel is much tighter for international teams coming in. In saying this, I want to recognize that USASF isn't even the original governing body of cheerleading. The ICF is. The ICF emerged from collaboration between the European Cheerleading Association and the Japan Cheerleading Association, who sought to create the first global governing body for cheerleading. The ICF is the first governing body of cheerleading. Based in Tokyo, Japan, the ICF was set up as a non-profit federation dedicated to developing cheerleading as a sport. Although it played such a pivotal role in pioneering cheerleading's global development, it's hardly talked about today. The federation launched the first truly international cheerleading world championships in 2001, a milestone event hosted in Tokyo that predated other world's competitions in the sport. Also, it rotated locations globally, hosting worlds in Finland, Germany, Japan, and so on. The ICF, or IFC, was and still is so important. It provided a platform for countries across Asia, Africa, Europe, and the Americas to develop their cheer programs under common rules. Obviously, this isn't the quote-unquote main worlds anymore. In the early 2000s, a parallel cheerleading power structure began to rise, centered in the United States. In 2003, Varsity Spirit, the largest U.S. cheerleading company, along with other industry leaders, founded the U.S. All-Star Federation. USISF was closely tied to Varsity's interests. In 2004, USISF launched the Cheerleading Worlds. USISF's Worlds eventually surpassed the ICF's Cheerleading World Championships. The rise of USISF and Varsity's network in the 2000s created a parallel power center in cheerleading. The ICF/IFC's original role as the sole international governing body was challenged by the US-driven system that offered a different model of competition. Over time, the balance of influence shifted heavily towards the US-centric structures, especially for all-star competitive cheer, which brings us to how the ICF/IFC has been affected in recent years. Now, I want to circle back to Varsity, the company behind so much of all-star cheer. Varsity's marketing machine has certainly assisted in building up American cheerleading's prestige. Varsity brands itself as the global authority for cheerleading, but it really tends to favor American teams and programs. If you look at Varsity/FloCheer posts, it's not shocking to see that you really have to dive deep in order to find content featuring international teams. International divisions get far less hype unless there's a compelling story that appeals to US audiences. I feel as though this is what we should call a skewed visibility. It feeds into the narrative that only American teams can be super successful, and anything international is a tier below. When an American team wins, Varsity plasters their picture everywhere, along with big bold text that says World Champions. They do post international teams winning as well, yes, but it doesn't get nearly as many posts or nearly as much recognition. Varsity, intentionally or not, has perpetuated the myth of American cheer superiority. The consequence is that American cheer fans and even athletes often aren't aware of how good some international teams are, or how much adversity they have overcome. It creates an us versus them narrative, where us, the US, are always expected to win, and if quote-unquote them wins, it's an upset or a fluke. One might argue that Varsity has no incentive to level the playing field. After all, their primary customers are American gyms. It's in their interest to keep the American teams feeling on top of the world, because they are, after all, their main moneymakers. If Varsity pushes for these international teams to be recognized, Varsity might lose some marketability. Imagine the big money gyms not always winning. Is that a reason rules stay the way they are? We can't say for sure, but it's a question that hangs in the air. So, the bottom line is that international teams are treated unfairly through a combination of restricted eligibility, difference in rules, resource disparities, and a US-centered governance and media system. If cheerleading is to be considered a global sport, change needs to happen. Imagine a future where a Colombian cheer team can compete with the best 12 athletes in their country, where a French all-girl team can stand on the podium next to the World Cup shooting stars, or where the venue might one day be in Europe or Asia. Imagine a world where we truly say the best team won, not the best American team or best international team separately. USISF and Varsity have the power to make changes. It's up to them to decide whether or not they will. I say it's time to break the divisive structures we have in place down and truly come together on the world stage. Let's make the cheerleading worlds the cheerleading worlds.